Thank you, everyone who has joined us. We are going to start in just a moment or two. Okay, let's get started. I see that we have a lot of people watching on LinkedIn as well, in addition to the Zoom. Um, Welcome, everybody. My name is Adam. I'm the Executive Director of Planet Reimagined, and I am thrilled to have you all here for our fellowship showcase. Now, I'm coming to you from the middle of France. As some of you might know, I'm a musician at the same time. And as I've been on tour over these last few weeks, I've run into a lot of climate related incidents. Yesterday, I was in Greece and in Athens, the streets completely flooded. We were going through about 2.5 feet of water in order to get to the venue. Our hotel rooms completely flooded. A few days previously, there was record breaking heat when we were in Italy. Right now, we're in the south of France and we can't even find a place to have shelter outside of the venue. So as I'm traveling around, I'm seeing so many of the directly related climate effects. And while I've been here, I've been taking a lot of different meetings and having conversations with people who have been directly affected by climate change, so much more than I have on this tour. I sat down with the US Embassy to the Holy See, to the Vatican, and we had a very interesting conversation about the role that religion plays in climate. I sat down with the US Embassy to Ukraine, but when I was in Budapest, and we talked about climate refugees and a whole different type of refugee crisis that's happening with Ukraine right now. So there couldn't be a more appropriate time for me to talk about the work that Planet Reimagined is doing, and especially the fellowship programs. The fellows this summer have worked on so many different topics that relate to climate. And when I say so many different topics, yes, you're going to hear from 3 different groups, 2 New Futures Fellowship groups and 1 Climate Active group. But their research and their advocacy touch on everything from rivers to communities, to food systems, to energy, to policy. And that is one of the key things that we like to talk about here at Planet Reimagined, is that climate really is everything. So You might be wondering why the structure of what we do is based in research and advocacy. And this summer, the fellows really have bridged the gap between research and advocacy. For the first handful of weeks and the first month or so, they worked really hard on developing their research from the ground up, while also standing on the shoulders of a lot of the research that came before. But then at the same time, they figured out, what are we actually going to do with that research? How are we going to make it applicable in very specific circumstances? And how can we blow those ideas up to make them work in a lot of different contexts in the United States and around the world? And you'll hear from fellows talking about all of their different experiences. Now, after that, you're going to hear a bit about our Climate Active Fellowship Program, which are our postgraduate fellows who've been working on a year-long project around activating people at large-scale events. Now, I don't want to speak for too long because I want to make sure we give maximum time to the fellows and all the incredible work that they've been doing. So with that, I am going to turn it over and we are going to watch a little trailer video so you can see the kind of things they've been working on.
Hello everyone, I am Rupesh, all the way from Nepal.
Karnali River is one of the most pristine and the last free-flowing mainstream river of Nepal. I have spent this summer researching, talking to experts, and traveling to various riverine communities.
The river that I'm focused on is an urban river. It is a seasonal river. It's called Malir. And what I'm studying is how the river supports an ecosystem around it. It supports people, stories, and histories.
आते थे अपने अजीजों के यहाँ तो हम रखते थे जाने खत्म नहीं होता था ऐसा वसी.
Hello everyone, my name is Lassana Ndiaye. I'm from Senegal, based currently in Rwanda. I'm African Leadership University student. So what I'm focused on the rivers is basically Senegal's rivers, but most focused on Bakel, the city.
The Supreme Court is basically in violation of a previous treaty that was created. The Navajo Nation is in a water crisis. People are unable to get access to clean drinking water, let alone water for flushing toilets or even doing their dishes. And we need to stand up and make it vocal that we need to see more change on the river.
Let's talk about clean energy on state trust lands. Energy transitions are about people. The U.S.'s current energy system has been built and maintained by workers and communities all around the country over the course of generations. It is important that these communities aren't left behind.
I have a question. You mentioned that you delve into the economic literature a lot, and in what way have you had to mediate between economic development and also nature-based solutions or any type of climate-related priorities, which most of the times are like pitted against each other instead of like almost complementing each other?
Welcome all audience. Welcome to the episode 10 of Climate Action in Pakistan, episode 10 webinar series. Today's topic is climate change and religion and the relationship between it.
What 3 words would you use to describe our project?
This is a little bit hard. I would say concert, engagement, and power.
Nice. All right. I'd keep it simple with artists, audiences, and actions. So, to hear from me more, stay tuned to Planet Reimagined.
Fantastic. So before we hear more from the fellows, Zoo, would you mind starting my video? It's saying that you're the one who has to start it for me. There we go. Thank you. Before we hear from the fellows, as you can see, a lot of the work that they did, in addition to creating research projects, including white papers, really strong advocacy plans. One of the key things for this summer was they had to create a large amount of content in order to explain to a larger audience about their project. And you saw some of that content in the video. That's a key piece of what we're doing here, because so much about complex research fails to reach the audience that can do the most about it. And that's why all of the skills that they learned this summer by bringing in all of the different experts and all of the different trainings has given them the ability to translate really complex ideas into something really accessible and something that can really translate into action. Now, I'm going to turn it over to our Director of Fellowships, but I just want to say one thank you. I want to make sure that we thank the Patrick J. McGovern Foundation and the Walton Foundation for making these projects possible. Without their support, we would not have been able to bring these fellows on the journey. So I would like to turn it over to Veena. Veena is our incredible fellowship director. Veena, take it away.
Hello, good morning. I'm based in Costa Rica to keep up with the global perspective on this fellowship. And I wanted to say a bit, you've seen in the video the 3 different themes, but I wanted to say a bit about what we look for and how we actually take forward this idea of research and advocacy. Most people, when they do an undergraduate degree, learn about research, but it's much harder to think about, well, if I want this research to reach the people who make change, how do I frame it? Or if I want this research to really start a movement and reach the people who care about it, who would take this information and take it to the decision makers, what do I do? And those answers are different. So when we looked for the qualities, we had a huge number of applicants for each of these fellowship themes. I want to say a bit about the kinds of qualities we looked for. Of course, we looked for people who had been, who could write, who had done very interesting work related to climate, environment in their academic studies. And we intentionally looked for a very broad range of academic backgrounds because we believe the climate crisis, like so many of the crises the world's facing now, demands an interdisciplinary approach. You're going to have to work with people who have really different backgrounds and training and cultural backgrounds and geographies if we want to solve this crisis. So it was with that vision, we of course looked for a grounding in the writing. We looked for evidence of having done something on their own in terms of activism related to climate. We looked for people who had gone out of their way to try to look at visual materials to try to reach out to a broader base of people. We looked for communication skills, and more subtly, we looked for people who really wanted to work across boundaries, across disciplinary boundaries, across cultural, and also work remotely with people they've never met to devise a project. So the 3 themes, as you've seen in the video, are climate and river communities, where I'm going to introduce later that we have the advisor is Jeff Opperman. We have climate and renewable energy, the advisor is Ben Vahan, and we also have the Amplify activism group, which is a 1-year group. And in each of these groups, they've had to work together to think about, well, what do we do jointly? What do we do by ourselves? And they've also had to, and that's not an easy thing to do in the short time that the new Future Fellows have been working. And thanks to the generous support from the Walton Family Foundation, the fellows have also been able to engage in field visits, to talk to communities. You saw from in the video material. And so now I think it would be really interesting to hear from the advisors. I'm going to introduce Jeff Opperman, who has been our advisor for the climate and river communities. Jeff himself combines the research and the policy background. He is the global lead scientist for freshwater at World Wildlife Fund. He is a scholar. He also understands policy, and he's been giving invaluable guidance to the fellows. Thank you, Jeff.
Great, thanks, Veena. It's been a great experience for me, I have to say. So this year, WWF, who I work for, has a partnership with Planet Reimagined for the New Futures Fellows, with a group that is focused on rivers and communities. And what this group of fellows took on this summer is a subject that is immensely important to me. And that is that rivers have this diverse set of values, and they have value to a diverse groups of people, but typical traditional river management is managed for a narrow set of values with decisions being made by a narrow group of people. And these narrow values are usually the ones that are most easily monetized and that usually come from regulating or changing the river, such as hydropower or sand mining. And the diverse values are often hidden to decision makers. So a big part of what we at WWF strive to do is to shine a light on those hidden values and to figure out how to communicate them to the general public, to heads of agencies, policymakers, etc. So you'll see why in a moment, you'll see why I'm so excited by the work that these fellows did. They immersed themselves in their case study rivers. They traveled, they talked to the people who live alongside the rivers. They really got into the heart of the issues. And they jumped in with great enthusiasm to explore these river management challenges that go back decades or even centuries. So they're incredibly complex, but they figured out ways to communicate the river's hidden values and to amplify the voices of those who are working to restore those values. And I think, are we starting with a short video? Are we launching into rivers and communities? Okay, yeah, so we'll start with a short video that the fellows made, and then you'll hear from them. Thanks.
Slow motion video.
So now we have the 4 members of the Rivers Group to speak about what their project is. Would anyone like to start? Should I go ahead and ask some questions? Hi, Isabella. Good morning. Isabella has been surviving the heat of Arizona. Binish in Karachi, please. And we've got Ripesh in Nepal, in Bhaktapur, Nepal, Lasana in Rwanda. And the 4 of you not only are in wildly different places, but you have really different training. And maybe you can say something about you. I mean, when I looked at your applications, I was really struck by the passion that each of you conveyed for not only climate, but rivers. You all had an interest in rivers, and that was quite remarkable in this pool of applicants we had. But you approach it in really different ways. And maybe I'll start with Lasana and tell us a bit about your way of approaching communities and how you thought about the river systems.
Thank you, Vina. So these fellowships allow me to better understand and discover how important, if the natural resources are for certain communities, like this are the one on the backyard, but where the rivers is part of their daily life through fishing, farming, and even cultural tradition. Like me, the backyard communities was not easy for me because I've tried to meet them and exactly to know exactly what is their living within the communities. So this fellowship allowed me to meet them and trying to know exactly what is their behavior and exactly what are their living, daily living within the rivers. And when we reach them, you know that the rivers are very important for her and for the communities. Like regarding the young woman I just discovered there who just washing their clothes in the rivers, and she just told me, you know that these rivers, like even my grandparents, they live here for a while, and now me too, I'm living here, and I can't go within the rivers because all my daily life I did it in the rivers. Early morning when I wake up at 8 a.m., I'm in the rivers to wash my clothes. And afternoon also, I was there to watch my child and all these things. And coming to the communities, like with the fishing communities, they told me like the rivers are very important from them since like the past few decades. The parents are fishing also, but now also they're trying to fish, but they trying to mix it with agriculture because as we know now, the rivers is not very, very helpful for them because we have dams there, Manantani dams in the rivers. So that's
right.
quite.
Let me pause. So one of the things that you're saying that really struck me about your studies and what you're approaching is you look at communities. You've studied wildlife management, but you're really interested in how do the communities relate to these rivers in so many different ways. But the other thing you've mentioned is over time, over history, and the other thing I want to say to those of you in the webinar is that even though Lassana is from Senegal, he went to a part of the country where he had never been, and he had to have a translator. So even within the same region, this was a different culture you had to go across. And so let me turn to one of the scientists in our group, Isabella, and you are looking at a completely different river. And I think some of the similar themes come up, but say something about your training and how you approached it.
Yeah, thank you so much. So I'm a master's student here at the University of Arizona in the US, and my thesis work is actually looking at the Amazon River and results of the runoff creating two separate pools of energy sources for marine microbes, looking at inorganic and organic phosphorus, and I'm assessing the ability for these microbial communities to evolve to utilize these different energy sources, which has not previously been known. And I focused on a river that's decently close to me. I looked at the Colorado River, and there was a recent court case at the beginning of this fellowship that was enacted that essentially told the Navajo Nation that the federal government has no need to assist them in their fight for water rights. This is a particularly difficult issue because Navajo Nation spans 4 states within the US. It goes into New Mexico, Utah, and Arizona, with a large portion of that being in Arizona. And Arizona itself has not quantified the Navajo's water rights. They keep trying to add extra things alongside of it, being like, we're not going to renew your casino rights until you quantify your water rights. We're going to keep a coal mine active until you quantify your water rights, trying to get them to settle for something that's less than their community can even sustain or flourish with. So many of them, when I've gone up there in the past, don't have access to running water. They have to have tanks outside their house, drive 4 hours away, get non-drinking water to just bring to do dishes or flush the toilets, and then have to go to the store every couple of days to get fresh drinking water because they don't even have access to that because this state is being so difficult with quantification. And it's a difficult issue because we're in Arizona, we are in a desert, so water is already a limiting resource out here. So the state of Arizona wants to be able to give a lot of water to these developing cities like Phoenix and Tucson, but they're forgetting about the people who have been on the river for decades prior to all of these cities' establishments, and they're being left out of a lot of these discussions.
So that's very interesting in that you're a scientist, but a lot of the issues you found that came up with the Colorado River were to do with enforcement of treaties and to do with not measuring. When things aren't measured, they almost don't have value. So how do you actually give value to something that's not measured? So that was another principle of the fellowship, which is no matter what your disciplinary training, you end up finding things that are outside that, and how do you take that forward? So, but I also want to emphasize that all of you brought your training to the other people's projects. And so to move to Beanish, who actually lives in one of the world's biggest cities next to the river. And so you're a graphic designer, you're a writer, you're an artist. So how did you find this, the experience of looking at the river?
Thank you, Veena. So I live in Karachi, and the river I was thinking about is Malir. My background is in graphic design. I enjoy documentary filmmaking and collecting stories. How I approached the river, earlier I was working with a story about a woman who lived by the sea. So I was focusing on a fisherfolk person by the sea. And then when I started thinking about Malir, what's currently happening right now is that Malir is one of the major rivers in Karachi, which is it's a developing city. And what is happening at the moment is that there is a green belt which is supported by Malir River. However, because of rampant development, that green belt is being affected in a haphazard manner. And with that, the river is being shrunk. What eventually would happen is that it may lead to urban flooding, but because of the loss of the green belt, we will also lose the life that it supports. And by life, I don't just mean the communities, which are the indigenous communities of the Malir River, not just that, but the birds, the animals, the fruits, the trees, all of that. So my approach to the Malir River was, and understanding was that I first go and speak with the community members. There was a training program during the summer that I attended by the Indigenous Alliance. They're the locals of that area, and they're trying to educate younger people about what is happening in Malir at the moment and its benefit to the city at large. I spoke with some of the people. One of the ladies that I spoke with was Lal Begum, and she talked about her relationship with the river. And I spoke with an activist who was also talking about how the river is being affected more so because of an expressway that is being built, for which the locals are trying to raise awareness. However, there's not much that's being done.
So just to pause there, that you brought up some other issues that Jeff alluded to, Beanish. You've talked about the expressway. So, what's monetized and what's not, because those of you who have spoken so far, you've talked about people's relationships over time with the river. And that isn't necessarily valued and seen there. But then you also mentioned, Beanish, awareness, and that Karachi's very existence depends on the Malir. But it's not, that value isn't actually taken into account when development is looked at. But then you've used your design, your listening skills to actually get stories, your storytelling skills. And that leads to Rupesh, who is a forester by training in Nepal. And you also, Rupesh, in your work, you also did a lot about the relationship people have with the river and the difference between the relationship and how the government is looking at the potential revenue. So tell us something about that.
Well, it's been a common theme throughout all of our works. If you look at Isabella's work with the Navajo Nation, you can see how the tribal and indigenous communities, which are there for centuries, are being deprived of their rights, and the water sources are actually being fed to the larger, developed, and more populated cities. If you look at Malir's issue in Pakistan, you'll see how the local peoples and their right to environmental health and the ecosystem services of rivers are being undermined for the haphazard urban infrastructure development. If you look at the Senegal River, you'll see that how the downstream communities are being deprived of their socio-ecological interactions and the ecological services of river due to dam construction. Now, if you look at Karnali River, it has the same common underlying thing. It's the most pristine and the last free-flowing river in the region. It lies in western Nepal, and it actually shapes the economy, ecology, and ecosystem of the region through its course and flows. But the diverse values, the multiple benefits that we so often talk about are actually distributed to people over the range of region. However, it is not adequately communicated, and neither it is properly understood by the wider public and the decision makers. And the reason for that is that it's extremely hard to quantify those values in terms of money. For example, how do you actually quantify the role and the value of river sediments that are vital for the agriculture, for the millions in the region. And these values often get undermined for other narrow-set values, for example, hydropower, electricity, irrigation, etc. So we conducted this research. We actually conducted rigorous research. We followed it up with some training and guidance from a range of experts. And then we actually practically firsthand visited the communities and listened to their stories. And we have concluded that the river straits management needs a paradigm shift. It first needs to integrate.
I want to say something though, Rupesh, that is really important, in that while you were working on this, you happened to find out that this is a huge issue at the moment in Nepal. There's a case in the Supreme Court about the very river you're looking at. And not only did the people working on it wanted the research of your teammates. They wanted to know what was happening in other countries to buttress their argument. So that was quite unexpected, wasn't it?
It was certainly unexpected, and I found it through the course of my endeavor. I was interviewing an expert, and I suddenly got to know there's a Supreme Court case being filed right now, and the Supreme Court has already given a stay order and currently looking at the issues. The course case particularly focused, it centered on the argument that the multiple values of Karnali River needs to be considered over the narrow set of values, and some vital stretches of the river needs to be protected. And so they actually wanted our content.
But
they actually wanted our content to be as a proof.
But I think we're going to put some of that in the white paper, and that's going to be out for everyone. But what I want people to see here is how the very fact that you were all working across seemingly disconnected spaces and rivers, we have common themes of the common values are not monetized and they're not seen as values. We also have this situation where communities have a connection and that's been ruptured and broken. We have a situation where the existing treaties are not honored. But what I found most gratifying was the idea that people in Kathmandu wanted to see what Isabella had found out, or what Lasana or what Binish had found out, and that was going to help them make their case. So I think that shows the value of this seemingly haphazard group of countries. So I'm really impressed with how, in what a short time, the four of you have been able to build trust, working relationships, and also, Rupesh, it's so notable that you started out by talking about your teammates' work and how you saw echoes in your own work, and I find that very moving. So we're excited to be able to see the culmination of this, and I'm going to now transition to Ben Dahan, who is the advisor for the Renewable Energy Group, and we're going to hear a bit from them. Thank you so much.
Great, thanks so much, Veena. Yeah, so my name is Ben, and my background is, or has been, in marrying the natural sciences with the social sciences and research. And through Planet Reimagined, like a lot of these fellows, and to Veena's point, it's been incredibly gratifying to take it a step further and to marry the research side directly with the advocacy side, to not just produce knowledge, but to produce it in a way that is useful and impactful. And that's exactly what this climate and renewable energy transition team has been doing. And they've been really integral in building upon work that we've done over the past year that we've called Common Grounds for a Clean Energy Future. And so what we had identified is that there is, in this somewhat conflicted policy sphere of the energy transition, where there's so many competing stakeholders and stakeholder values, not unlike a river system, there actually are a lot of opportunities for common sense solutions that can, put the fossil fuel industry on the same page with renewable developers and put them on the same page with conservationists. And so one of those solutions that we've identified that the team worked on a bit is called co-location, essentially mixed land use, where land that had previously been locked away for use by oil and gas companies in various forms can also, and at the same time, be used to site wind and solar farms and move the energy transition forward. So that's all to say that the fellows have done a really excellent job of putting all this together. especially all these stakeholder perspectives and this really robust and this very niche literature. And so I'm most excited about putting it into the hands of partners who can really do something about it. So I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to Adam, whose idea and PhD was the genesis of this idea.
Thank you, Ben, and thank you for your amazing work this summer with the fellows. I think we should just jump right in and start speaking with the fellows about the project, because even though over the last year we've been working on this approach to land sharing at the federal level, there is a lot of complexity taking something countrywide and applying it in a lot of specific individual contexts around the world. And we're going to talk about a handful of these, but I'd love to start with Cecilia, whose background is much more on the policy side and the legal side. So your work on this project, what was it like to take something that had already been worked on at the federal level and then think about how do we apply this in a bunch of specific case studies, as specifically for your area in the United States?
Oh, thank you so much, Adam, for the question. For me, the most impactful thing is just seeing how we can take such a macro level problem that is climate change and how we can see how all the solutions happen at the local level, at the national level, as you mentioned. And my team and I, we worked a lot on investigating examples in the United States regarding state trust lands and how we can compare them to other international examples. And like you mentioned, the Common Grounds focus a lot on federal lands, and we found a new opportunity with state trust lands, who their own system, which funds public school education in many states, is built in for sustainability. And it's almost ironic that it is funded by fossil fuel companies, which are not sustainable by nature. And through this work and with the help of my teammates, we've been able to see how much opportunity there is for different stakeholders.
That's incredible. So this piece about education really interests me, because when you think of the energy sector, you don't think about how it's related to so many other pieces, including rivers, but also in particular with how state trust land funds education. And just for everyone who's watching, the idea behind this project is there's a tremendous amount of oil and gas land in the United States and around the world that's already been leased. Some of it is producing oil and gas right now. Some of it is no longer producing oil and gas. But through a large-scale study, we determined that a lot of that land is appropriate to put solar and wind. Now, part of the national study was looking at federal land, but your study was looking at state land. So Stephen, how did you go about identifying the most beneficial areas that were already producing oil and gas or leased for oil and gas, but then also overlaying that and figuring out where the most optimal pieces of land are for solar and or wind?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things that was really interesting about working with state trust lands is that a lot of these states out west that have these lands have this information readily available. So it was a great input for the research that they have maps of all of the oil and gas leases, all of the existing renewable leases as well on their website and with the data freely available. So something that we worked on was taking that data from these state land offices out west and combining it with data on clean energy potential and finding the overlap of areas that are currently leased out for oil and gas on state trust lands, but also have a lot of potential for wind and energy. And what we found is that there's a lot of overlap because the areas in the West, again, that have state trust lands are the sunniest and windiest parts of the country. So there's a ton of potential for this approach. And it's still sort of in the early stages. State trust lands have only been leased for renewables for really like the last few years. And we are hopeful that through this report, we can help make the case for expanding that.
That's fantastic. Now, Lala, your work was focusing on applying this idea in a handful of international contexts. And in the white paper, which obviously we will publish very soon, you identified a significant number of places where there is potential for this idea. Can you talk about it?
Yeah, so I started to look for examples that give us context of why this should be done and why it has not yet been done and why it is important to do now. So of course we know, like by now we all understand, like if you're listening to this, that why it's important, because but there's so many replies to that. But the main question is why now? Because the main problem is that the land use policies and the land use challenge, it's not just a matter of one day. If we take a decision today, that's going to impact our generations. And by now we are pretty much clear on that. So the one of the aspect I was looking at the whys and why nots of now. And then the second thing which came across to me was that not only do we need to take action now, but we need a holistic framework for just like, okay, it's energy is not just one of the solutions. And we are not just looking at the net zero energy, we are looking for a sustainable future. So like meeting the needs of future, then food comes across. And like, for example, I live in Ireland, so there's a lot of green space and there's a lot of potential of renewable energy, but that does not solve the entire problem. When I actually started to work on this, and I was just looking at Ireland, which is a very small country compared to US, the land policy is completely messed up. And the same is the case for Pakistan, where I actually belong from. And so like each country has different set of problems that they are fighting with, but then the only the one common solution comes up that we all need is the framework that takes on board all the major solutions. And like everybody is trying to help. So like some of the countries are trying to use wastelands, as you mentioned when you were introducing the topic, that there are lands where there were previously oil and gas, but there's no more oil and gas. So that could be used for hydrogen production, which is still renewable. That's a whole debate, how hydrogen is renewable, cleaner, I would say, and then it could still be used for that. And then the other examples include using offshore, just replacing by a little amount of, even for their own generation, own processes. If we just replace a smaller amount of it by renewable, which is pretty much possible. So these all examples gave us an insight of everybody's trying to help, and there is potential in this idea. It's not a very innovative idea. And beyond all that, we need a holistic framework to support a future that we envision. Otherwise, without this, we're going to fail. And we'll know in future, in 2050, oh my God, this is the mistake we did in 2023, and we should have thought about it.
Absolutely. And I couldn't agree more on the need for a holistic framework. But at the same time, this idea, this co-location idea, is incredibly complex and is incredibly difficult to explain to all of these different stakeholders. You have the oil and gas companies, you have the utility companies, you have the renewable energy companies, you have local energy communities, you have local policymakers, you have state policymakers, federal policymakers, and that doesn't even scratch the surface of all of the people who are involved in this kind of project. So moving from the research side to the beginnings of the advocacy side, Stephen, how did you and your group approach thinking about how to communicate this effectively when there are so many different types of stakeholders involved?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that with this question, there's actually a really interesting parallel to the Rivers group with what Rupesh was saying about recognizing the wide range of values provided by rivers. Something that we were thinking about throughout the summer was the wide range of values provided by building energy projects, clean energy projects on state trust lands. And it's not just about climate change mitigation. It's about, like we've talked about, funding schools. It's about reducing the total land footprint of energy infrastructure. It's about improving reliability and affordability of energy. So with these like wide range of benefits to the approach that we've been looking at, there's really something that you can take when you're approaching any decision maker, stakeholder, community member, that everybody can find a benefit in the approach. So that's something that we've always been keeping in mind all summer.
That's great. So we do have just a minute left. And so Cecilia, I want to end with you with one more question. What's next? You know, you've done the research, you've created this white paper, you have this advocacy strategy. It's building on something that's been a years-long process that now has bipartisan support in Congress at the federal level. What would you say the next step is?
Excellent question, Adam. I think at the end of the day, advocacy means just forming relationships, just like we were trained for. Being, I remember one of the things I remember is you have to form relationships. You got to see what the other side wants and what we have in common. And at the end of the day, it's a huge planet. We all live in it, and we have to mimic the best practices that we've seen. Any type of progress that we've seen in the project over developing renewable energy. We've seen it in Ireland with Lala's work. And if we mimic these best practices, we can make the energy transition as speedy, effective, and most importantly, as sustainable as possible.
Thank you all for your incredible work. As we mentioned, we are publishing the white papers and the content that you all created very soon in the next handful of days. So you'll be able to read in more detail, both about the River and Communities Group and the Renewable Energy Transition Group. I'm going to take this moment and turn it over to Mila Rosenthal, who is our managing director. And she is going to bring us to our last fellowship group that we're going to talk about today. Hi, Mila.
Hi, I'm Mila.
Hi. While Mila troubleshoots her audio, I will do a brief introduction of the Climate Active project. So our Climate Active project is our year-long postgraduate project, which takes the kind of work around research and advocacy, around thought and action, and kind of blows it up to a year-long study where the fellows dive really deep into something and produce really innovative and novel research. And this year, through a partnership with the Patrick J. McGovern Foundation, we are also working with Ticketmaster and Live Nation. We are working with Climate Outreach, and we are working with Reverb. We're looking at the question of large group experiences and how we can create more advocacy around these large group experiences. And you might think that, you know, of course, involving a celebrity in a cause is great, and it's always the right answer to create more reach. But we realized that no one had ever actually done that study to figure out how to effectively do that. So I would like to bring on our two Climate Active Fellows who, again, are in the middle of their year-long project. So they are just going to give a little bit of an update on where they are right now. That would be Leah, and that would be Caleb. And Mila, feel free to join us at any point.
You're working?
I think the audio is not working. Sorry. Okay, so we'll just jump in. Leah and Caleb, let's start with Leah. Leah, why don't you give a short description of the project itself, and then we'll turn it over to Caleb to talk about where we are in this year-long process.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Adam, and thanks for everybody being here. So basically our project is looking at this big question, right? So we know in the past several years, polls in the United States have shown that the majority of the Americans actually care about climate. We're concerned, we're worried, and we want the government and big businesses to actually do something. So we know about 65 to 70% of Americans actually care about this consistently every single year. But the truth is that a lot of people know that it's happening, but a lot of people are not really actively engaged, right? So from my experience, as a local climate organizer for 4 years, that's exactly what I saw. Like, you talk to people on the street and then people are like, yeah, we understand. We see the heat wave, we see the hurricanes, we see the droughts. But then when I ask, oh, do you want to join us? Or, what are you doing? The answer is always like, oh, we're not quite sure. So we're trying to bridge the gap from knowing to taking action. And then, so the project is really, in my opinion, we're trying to use the existing infrastructure of a music artist, right? Thinking about someone like Taylor Swift or even Adam here, right? They have so many fans, right? And then these fans buy tickets coming into a concert, and then they have something in common, actually, right? They have their shared love for live music. They also have their shared love for the artist. But one thing that we actually never really talked about is that they have their shared love and care for the planet. And so how do we bridge these things together to actually help people understand that, hey, we're not the minority, we're the majority. We actually are one of or many of the 70% of Americans who are concerned. And how about let's use the concert space to do something where we're so happy, we sing with each other, we dance with each other, and we see our artists care about this. And then there's this existing community that can actually drive action forward. So that's the question that we're really looking into. In addition to driving the action forward, we're also trying to think about how do we keep people in the movement? And then the artists and the concerts are great opportunities for that.
Amazing. So Caleb, how are we doing this? And where are we right now? And also, I can't believe that Leah put me in the same category as Taylor Swift. There's no way I deserve that. So
yeah, so as you said from the beginning, Adam, this is quite novel as a research project. It's a common idea to use celebrities in advocacy work, but it's not common to imagine the way to use artists as a figure for solidarity and not just for fundraising or raising awareness. So there's a different element here where we're trying to scale up the climate movement. And the artist is a catalyst, they're a relational leader, but they're not the center of the work. It's more using and capitalizing on the unique relational influence they have and the emotional influence of a concert space to help mobilize people who already care about the issue, to take that risk, to take that step into action and involvement, knowing that as people get involved over time, that's where you start to build this, this core critical mass of people that are actively engaged over time. And so how can we use these moments in time? And so we had to build a lot of research from a lot of different streams of thought to kind of build a concept that worked, to make sense of how this might actually play out. And then we were able to use that to develop a survey that we've been using to interview and test these findings with a lot of concert goers, thanks to our partnership with Ticketmaster. So we just have our initial data coming in. We're hoping to get a lot more, and then a whole nother round of research with Reverb that's going to help us to see not just general music fans, but also music fans that are already a little bit more engaged in the climate space, to kind of see this progression over time and how we can move different kinds of fans further into involvement in the climate movement. And the final stage is like how we'll test that is actually going to concerts and trying some of these exact methods in the live space and seeing how they play and how the fans respond.
What are the implications here? No matter what we find out, we're going to learn something. But what are the real implications here? Yes, for music, potentially for sports, maybe for some other areas of how to engage people effectively. What are these implications for either of you? Mila.
Hi, can you hear me?
Perfectly.
Oh, terrific. Great.
Yes.
When I dropped off, I came back and I understand, Adam, that you were being compared to Taylor Swift in my absence. So
I'm gonna end my video and just let you take it from here. I was just asking about the implications for the study, but go ahead, take it away.
Great.
Oh, sure. I think I can talk about the implication a little bit. I think the implication of our study would really show people that in any large events, right? How do we use the community that's already existed in the space, right? Whether it's concert, whether it's sports, I'm a sports fan myself, whether it's in churches, whether it's in school, right? Like there's so many different contexts that already gather people together. And how do we use that existing infrastructure again? And think about, like in our previous 2 fellowship, they talk about the wide variety of values, right? So using that wide varieties of values of these existing communities to actually make the world a better place, or think about climate solutions and climate community in that sense. And then coming back to the most important part, like Cecilia said in the last group, it's about relationship, right? So again, within these communities, we're trying to find a way to use the relationship in those communities to say, hey, we see you, right? We see each other. And then how do we see each other and bring that forward to see the change happen?
Great. Well, I managed to come back on just in time to wrap us up. Thank you, Caleb and Leah, for that. I think about the Amplify project in one of the ways that we approach climate communications. When we talk about movement building, there are a few different schools of thought. And one is that we should be raising the alarm, that we should be talking about the problems and how severe they are. Some of the kind of research and analysis like the Rivers Group has done about the impacts on in many cases, the poorest and most vulnerable, who have the fewest resources to deal with them, that we keep the pressure on the reasons that we have to be very concerned. There's another approach, which is also to be positive, to remind ourselves that there are solutions, to be talking about the different approaches like the Clean Energy Group is doing, of where there are new approaches that offer some hope. And I will say that overall, the thing that continues to give me hope is being able to work with these amazing fellows, with our partners, with everybody who has joined us today. I want to say thank you to our partners on Amplify, Climate Outreach, and Reverb, Live Nation, Green Nation, which is the sustainability arm of Live Nation, and Ticketmaster. And thank you for the generous support from the Patrick J. McGovern Foundation. For the Rivers community, thank you for the Walton Foundation, Family Foundation support, and to WWF, thank you, Jeff, great partnership. And thank you to all the speakers and trainers who've worked with our fellows, and to all of you who've joined us. I want to say a special thank you to the fellows this year and to the fellows in past years who have continued to give us all a good reason for hope. Thank you.